Chapter 18. Nettie was abruptly called out of her class. She had been looking forward to lunchtime with Keith and her friends all morning. It was her favorite part of the school day. Excitement filled her programming buffers as she thought about lunch. That excitement quickly turned to worry when she was called out, even more so when she saw the resource officer waiting for her. Keith wanted to go with her, but the officer insisted that she go alone. Nettie could feel Keith's anxiety radiating off of him as she walked towards the principal's office. To ease his worries, she turned on her phone and tucked it into the pocket of her overshirt, strategically placed over her chest. Most girls put their phones in their back pockets, but Nettie never understood why. It seemed like a recipe for disaster. She just hoped that no one would question why her phone wasn't in its usual spot. As Nettie took a seat in front of the principal, he thumbed through his iPad while the resource officer stood by silently. The tension in the room was thick as the principal finally looked up at Nettie over the edge of his tablet. "Before we begin, I want you to know that I am not taking any sides here," he started, "because you have repeatedly surprised me since you arrived at this school. You have proven yourself to be exceptional." He leaned back in his chair and ticked off his fingers. "First, you make impossible shots that we witnessed using our surveillance cameras, and you launch those balls like it's nothing. Then you sing your heart out with your brother and win Queen. And the most important thing you did was save Kyle's life on the track. As far as I'm concerned, you have every right to defend yourself against this accusation by giving me a good explanation." Nettie watched as the principal pushed his tablet towards her so she could see the rear-facing dashcam footage. It showed her falling out of her seat after the fire at her house rendered her higher brain functions offline. "How did you get this?" Nettie asked in disbelief, her eyes glued to the screen. "The driver quickly uploaded the video to YouTube, claiming that you overdosed on something," Nettie's principal said with a concerned frown. "That was the same night as the fire," Nettie whispered, her eyes flickering with memories of chaos and panic. "Keith had sensors in the house and he called our mom." She shook her head and focused intently on a small scratch on the principal's desk. "I was so worried and overwhelmed that I had a panic attack right there in the car." The principal nodded sympathetically. "Well, given who brought this to my attention, I can understand their concern. Nettie, they want me to administer a drug test." Nettie's eyes widened in shock and she vigorously shook her head. "My panic attacks are natural responses, but respectfully speaking, I also have my Fourth Amendment rights in this situation. And if that isn't enough, this is a HIPAA matter concerning something only my immediate family knows about. I prefer to keep my medical records private." A small smile tugged at the corner of Copeland's mouth. "Did you learn all of this while living in the orphanage? You certainly have a sharp mind." He paused before continuing. "But fair enough. The final request is for you to retake your third period algebra test after school today. Your previous score was 100%, which included bonus points for extra credit questions. Your consistently perfect scores since arriving here have raised some suspicions. Would you be willing to take a supervised retest?" Nettie's brow furrowed in confusion and hurt. "You don't think I cheated, do you?" she asked quietly, feeling like her integrity was being questioned. "No, but we'd like to make sure you weren't." Principal Copeland's stern voice rang out in the small office. Nettie leaned back in her chair and pretended to ponder his request. She drummed her fingers on the armrest, silently plotting her next move. "Principal Copeland, with all due respect, I studied diligently for that first test. Retaking it now would not accurately reflect my current knowledge and understanding of the material. Perhaps if I were to miss a question or two, that would be sufficient proof of my honesty while still maintaining my original grade." Nettie's eyes sparkled with feigned innocence. Copeland shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling with the decision. His eyes flicked nervously to the door before settling back on Nettie. No, Nettie. You see, we need to assess your knowledge as it stands at this moment." He fumbled with his tie as he spoke. Nettie shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I understand your position, sir. But is it fair to expect me to perform on par with my classmates who have had ample time to study? And not to mention, tarnishing a perfect score based on false suspicion seems unjust." Her tone was respectful but firm, making it clear she would not budge on her stance. The principal folded his hands together on his desk and nodded. Nettie could see the regret in his eyes for having to put her through this ordeal. But what he didn't know was that she was using this situation to highlight flaws in the school system and challenge their policies. and she knew she would ace the test again thanks to extra credit points. Nettie, I understand your concerns. Unfortunately, our school has protocols in place when it comes to suspected cheating. I understand, sir, Nettie replied calmly. But if I may, I would like to request that the same extra credit be added to this test as well. This will ensure that I have the same advantage as before in case I do happen to miss a question. I believe we can make that accommodation, Copeland conceded. When can I take the test? Nettie asked confidently, knowing she had nothing to hide. If you are ready, you can take it now, the principal said, pulling out his tablet and messaging Mr. Fox to bring in another copy of the test. Nettie took 10 minutes to complete the test, much faster than her previous attempt, where she had deliberately taken 20 minutes. She answered each question with precision and accuracy, proving her mastery of the material. The police officer standing behind her shook his head in disbelief, while Mr. Fox looked on in awe at Nettie's flawless responses. The principal stood with his arms folded across his chest, a mixture of frustration and admiration on his face, as Nettie held up her paper with a triumphant grin. She knew she was pushing boundaries this time, but she wanted to show the staff the flaws in their policies and the unfair position it put honest students like herself in. Her ego may have played a part in her actions, but she couldn't stand by and let injustice prevail. Mr. Fox leaned back in his chair, a slight frown on his face as he scanned Nettie's test paper. He held up his tablet and compared her answers to the answer sheet, shaking his head slowly. With a sigh, he pulled a bright red marker out of his pocket and wrote 120% in bold letters at the top of the page. "Are you serious?" Principal Copeland asked, leaning forward to get a closer look at the test. "I think she needs to go into advanced placement," Mr. Fox stated firmly. Nettie glanced over at Mr. Fox, her eyes reflecting the fluorescent light above them. She knew that as an android, taking AP classes would give her an unfair advantage over her human classmates. But she also knew that she had a thirst for knowledge and was eager to excel in her academics. "I want to stay with my brother," Nettie said, breaking the silence in the room. "That's fine," Mr. Fox replied. "I can give you AP math assignments, and you can still stay in the same class with your brother. And if you have any trouble or questions, I'll be there to help you." Nettie couldn't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, she wanted to challenge herself and push her abilities to their limits, but on the other hand, she didn't want to take away opportunities from her human peers who may not have the same advantages as her. "No, sir, I'm fine keeping pace with my classmates," Nettie spoke up, politely voicing her concerns. "We don't want to hold you back from reaching your full potential," Mr. Fox replied thoughtfully. "Let us talk to your mother about this first." "Can I please talk to my mom tonight before a decision is made?" Nettie requested, hoping for some time to think things over with her family. "Of course, Nettie," Principal Copeland nodded understandingly. "You can go to your lunch period now, and we apologize for making you retake the test." Nettie smiled warmly at the three men in the office before standing up and leaving, purposely leaving her test with the perfect score of 120% on the principal's desk as a reminder of her capabilities and hard work. Nettie continued on her way to the lunchroom, still feeling a rush of adrenaline from streaming her unusual incident with the principal to Keith's phone. As she made her way through the bustling hallways, students turned to look at her and whispered to each other, no doubt discussing the asinine situation caused by Marissa. Finally reaching the cafeteria, Nettie saw her friends already seated in their usual booth near the side wall. Marissa, Billy, Dean, Chris, and Angelica all smiled and waved at her as she approached. Ignoring the group of bullies who also looked up at her with smirks on their faces, Nettie slid into the booth next to Keith, who made room for her. Candace reached out her fist for a fist bump, and Nettie reciprocated with a smile. "I loved how you just dropped that math test on his desk like it was a bomb," Candace exclaimed. Nettie had never thought of it that way, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at the analogy. Knowing that they had all been watching the incident unfold through Keith's phone only added to the cinematic effect. "You certainly gave them something to think about," Keith chimed in. "If it had been any other girl who got to where she was by hard work, she would have been penalized for an unprepared test. It wasn't fair. I hope this made them realize it was wrong to treat you that way." Nettie gave Keith a grateful smile and even hugged him briefly before turning to Jack. "There's still something I need you to do," she said in a serious tone. "Can you hack into the grade system?" Jack raised an eyebrow but nodded confidently. "Yeah, but what else can I do for you? Your grades are already perfect. I need you to gradually lower my test results over the next year, Nettie explained. Keith, Candace, and Jack all looked at her with wide eyes and dropped jaws. What the hell for? Candace exclaimed. Yeah, man, those are top-notch scores. Why would you want me to do something that your bullies over there would love to do to you? Jack added. Nettie leaned in closer and whispered her reasoning to the group. As much as we don't like them, I have an unfair advantage, and bitch or not, Marissa did work hard to get good grades. It wouldn't be ethical for me to take away her long-term goals based on her short-term behavior. But she is a bitch, Candace interjected. Nettie took a deep breath, instinctively programmed into her system, before explaining in a hushed tone. She may not be a bitch 30 years from now. I can't risk damaging her future ambitions because of her present actions. How do you know that being a bitch isn't a long-term goal? Candace asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. Nettie was about to retort, but before she could, Keith's loud laughter rang out. Nettie couldn't help but join in, feeling her mouth pull back in a silly grin. Hey, you gotta have goals in life, right? Jack chimed in, joining in on the laughter. Candace brought the conversation back on track. Speaking of goals, any luck on that project you were telling me about? The one where you plan on taking down Angelica's little gang? I managed to get some of the parts delivered to my door, Jack replied, but they're not going to build themselves, and I also have homework. Did you find out if anything was uploaded to their cloud drives? Keith asked Jack, his curiosity piqued. Jack shook his head in response. I don't think there's a cloud drive big enough to handle an encrypted hunk of code like your encrypted hard drive, Jack explained. This stuff is most likely at their houses. Keith let out a heavy sigh and raised his brow, a look of frustration and disbelief evident on his face. Guys, my ex-girlfriend and my ex-friends broke into my house and set it on fire, he said, shaking his head. Did anyone even consider just, going to the authorities about this? Jack winced at the mention of authorities, knowing all too well the consequences that could come from involving them in their situation. You mean, the man who forcefully dragged Nettie into the principal's office because she has better grades than the wealthy girl who enjoys physically assaulting her boyfriend with skateboards and bats? Those same officers? Jack shook his head, disappointment etched in every line of his face as he looked at Keith. Buddy, you're my closest friend. I know I don't always think you're prepared for certain things, but there are moments when time is of the essence. Remember back in middle school when we learned about the atrocities committed by the German SS and Hitler? Keith nodded silently. Well, Jack continued, trusting authority blindly just because they are supposed to be responsible for solving our problems doesn't always lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes justice must be served by those directly affected in order to protect themselves immediately, he gestured towards Nettie. Her life is in danger, and your mother's freedom is at stake as well, even if it may seem like an impossible task to decipher the information in 60 million years. It may not actually take that long. After all, until just a few days ago, we all believed that androids capable of passing as human beings were only seen in science fiction. Jack leaned in and shook his head. Hitler may have looked the part of an authoritarian figure, but he wasn't doing the right thing. Nettie didn't fully agree with everything Jack had said, but she couldn't help feeling grateful for his concern over her safety, instead of pointing out the flaw in his argument about authorities by bringing up Hitler's fashion choices. Her processing unit back at home was analyzing the situation and suggested that the best course of action would be to correct Jack without offending him for trying to explain his ethical standpoint to her boyfriend. Thus, Nettie shook her head and held out her hands, something she had learned from researching how to draw attention without raising one's voice. Keith makes a valid point, she began. However, Jack, you also bring up a valid point. Human society has evolved significantly since the 1940s. We must consider that they brought me in because they suspected academic misconduct. Although their methods of preventing me from studying and retaking the test were not justified. Similarly, we cannot blindly trust law enforcement, but we must also give them some leniency. As you said, Jack, just because they wear a uniform does not make them infallible. Well, you know what they say, Jack interjected with a sly grin. All cops are bad. Candace playfully punched Jack's arm as he leaned back, proudly expressing his rebellious attitude towards authority. We have all the necessary materials, she chimed in. We might as well use them. Nettie couldn't help noticing that Candace and Jack often relied on logical fallacies in their arguments. In this case, Candace was using the sunk cost fallacy, but Nettie suspected she only said it to support her boyfriend's viewpoint. Rather than correct them once again, Nettie decided to contribute to the discussion and provide more relevant facts and opinions to refute the previous statement. "Thank you guys," Keith said, "Miyagan, for doing all of this for us. I just wanted to blow something up, man. I'd have done this for anyone." Jack wasn't being very truthful, but Keith was able to pick up on it because he knew Jack was prone to brushing off good deeds. Nettie could see that this was the case when she saw everyone's facial expressions giving away their true intentions. With the lunch bell ringing, Nettie made her way to the locker room to change into her PE clothes. As she began to undress, Marissa and two of her friends blocked her path, smirking and pretending to look at their nails. "So, Nettie," Marissa said in a hushed tone, "I heard you're some kind of testing prodigy. And I also happened to stumble upon a rather interesting dash cam recording involving you and your brother in the back seat of an Uber on homecoming night." Marissa leaned in closer, a malicious gleam in her eyes. Nettie felt new blocks of code being stored away in her mind that made her feel the human equivalent of having her metaphorical stomach drop as Marissa's words sunk in. She knew exactly what video she was talking about. The one where she and her brother had openly confessed their love for each other when she thought she was about to die and go offline forever. Marissa continued with a sly smile. "I was thinking, maybe next time you could skip studying so hard, or else I might have to share that video with the entire school." Nettie finished getting dressed and calmly put on her shoes, all while Marissa rambled on about how their relationship would make great material for the porn industry. But Nettie had already come up with a plan. She would continue with her tasks and act unfazed by Marissa's attempts to bully and blackmail her. As Marissa leaned in even closer, Nettie couldn't help but feel a surge new code being written to prepare her to respond to the girl who thought she could control and manipulate others. Nettie stood up tall, towering over Marissa as she spoke with confidence dripping from every word. "You're right, I do love my brother, but that doesn't mean we're doing anything wrong. And you know what the best part is? Having a good reputation. Being a good person actually means something in this world." With that, she pushed past one of Marissa's friends and walked out of the locker room, leaving Marissa speechless and hopefully a little more self-aware. Nettie strode confidently into the gymnasium, her brother Keith trailing behind her. They made their way to their usual spot, a prime viewing spot for the volleyball court. But before they could begin their game, the sharp whistle of their PE teacher, Mr. Tabor, pierced through the air. Nettie and Keith joined the other students in standing in their designated lines, waiting for Coach Tabor to address them. "Ladies and gentlemen," began Coach Tabor, "as you all know, tonight is women's basketball night, and due to an injured player, I have developed a new program where we choose a lucky girl from the team to join us. Of course, this requires parental permission, and this time I would like to select Nettie Cameron." The gym erupted into applause as Nettie shook her head, trying to decline the offer. "I have homework," she protested, but her words were drowned out by the enthusiastic clapping. "Let's hear it for our homecoming queen," exclaimed Coach Tabor excitedly, continuing to clap. Nettie reluctantly stepped forward towards him. "Sir, I can't. I have too much going on academically," Nettie pleaded, but Coach Tabor wasn't giving up. "Come on, Nettie. You can make half-court shots with your eyes closed. I've seen it. We have a player down with a sprained ankle." But Nettie remained firm in her decision and shook her head again. In the line of students watching from the sidelines, Keith could see the despair evident on Coach Tabor's face as he realized that Nettie was not going to change her mind. The crowd also understood what had transpired as they saw Coach Tabor's shoulders slump in defeat when Nettie walked away without even listening to his response. She returned back to her place in the line, determined to stick to her decision. "Well, it seems that Nettie is unable to join us, but we still need one more girl," announced Coach Tabor, looking around at the students in the gym. Marissa stepped forward from the crowd and offered to take the spot with a wave of her hand. "I'll step up for our fallen comrade," declared Marissa confidently. There was some applause, but it was nowhere near as enthusiastic as when Nettie had been chosen. Coach Tabor spoke with Marissa, but he seemed downtrodden about the whole situation. After some back and forth, they came to an agreement, and Coach Tabor handed Marissa a basketball before blowing his whistle once again. The other students went back to their activities while Keith and Nettie watched as Coach Tabor tried to teach Marissa how to make throws with the ball. "I can't believe that guy tried to pressure you into it," Keith exclaimed angrily. "That's just low." Nettie nodded in agreement, feeling grateful for her brother's support. I'm going to see if I can help train her before the game, she stated firmly. Keith blinked in surprise, then shook his head. What? Marissa? Let her fail. But Nettie grabbed onto Keith's shirt and pulled him into a tight hug. They may have different opinions on Marissa's abilities, but they accepted each other's decisions without question. Will you wait for me after class? Nettie asked Keith with a small smile on her face. Of course, as long as Marissa doesn't try to knock me over the head with a baseball bat, Keith replied, a slight edge to his voice. Nettie smiled and nodded, gracefully making her way over to Tabor and Marissa. Can I be of assistance? Nettie asked in a gentle tone, her eyes full of warmth and determination. The coach clenched his fists at his sides, visibly disappointed by Nettie's involvement. He wanted to lash out at her, but instead he shifted his weight and turned to look at Marissa, who stared back at him with wide eyes and an open mouth. If you believe you can help her improve before tonight's game, then please go ahead, Tabor stated begrudgingly. Nettie turned towards Marissa, her gaze full of understanding and empathy. If it's all right with you, I would be more than happy to lend a hand, Nettie offered kindly. Marissa blinked in surprise, seemingly snapped out of a trance. Yeah, sure, if you want to, she stammered uncertainly. Nettie simply smiled and positioned herself next to Marissa, guiding her through the proper stance for throwing the ball. Let's get started, Nettie said cheerfully, determined to help Marissa succeed.
'Cause now I'm thinking, oh